One man, two lives. You know the preacher. But do you know the power broker? The insider whose wealth and access now rival the very people he once protested? Private jets, secret meetings at the White House, millions in donations from companies he once boycotted. What happened to Al Sharpton? The IRS and the jet life. A tailored $2,000 suit, designer sunglasses, and a smooth step toward the stairs of a private jet. That's how Reverend Al Sharpton was spotted leaving D.C., not after a sermon, but following a closed-door policy meeting at the White House. The photo spread across social media like wildfire. But behind the photo op, questions lingered. How could someone who once claimed to be broke and beaten by the system now live like a political rock star? Turns out that question has layers, and none of them are simple. In 2014, reports surfaced that Al Sharpton and several of his associated entities were in the red, deep in the red. The figure? Over $4.5 million in combined state and federal tax liens. These weren't just small disputes with the IRS. These were major allegations of unpaid personal taxes, back taxes owed by his nonprofit, and debts tied to his for-profit ventures like Raw Talent and Revels Communications. One personal federal lien alone, more than $3 million. Critics pounced. Headlines read like, indictments. Sharpton owes millions while courting presidents, reverend taxman, and even pulpit to private jet. But Sharpton didn't flinch. On national television, he told reporters the figures were misleading and taken out of context. He insisted he had been making payments regularly and that the bulk of the debt stemmed from disputed write-offs and delayed IRS filings, not fraud or evasion. In interviews, he deflected. "I've never tried to hide from my obligations. I'm working them down just like any American." Still, the controversy kept growing. Reports from investigative outlets revealed blurred lines between Sharpton's personal life and his nonprofit. One particularly damaging allegation claimed that NAN, his National Action Network, may have covered tuition for one of Sharpton's daughters at a private school. While Sharpton's camp denied the claim outright, the whispers stuck. Then came the deeper question: if any other person, particularly a black activist, owed millions to the IRS, would they still be flying private, shaking hands with U.S. presidents and appearing on national news 4 nights a week? For many observers, the answer was a hard no, and that's where this story gets darker. Because while most folks fight tooth and nail to stay afloat during an audit, Sharpton's influence only seemed to grow. In fact, some argued that his access to power may have shielded him from consequences that ruined others. Case in point, rappers, athletes, even pastors, who owed less than Sharpton and found themselves dragged through court, accounts frozen, properties seized. So what made Al Sharpton different? That brings us to the engine behind his machine, the money, the donors, and the deals no one talks about until now. Behind the pulpit, the money machine. The National Action Network, NAN for short, wasn't just a platform for civil rights. It became Sharpton's war chest, media hub, and political headquarters all rolled into one. Founded in 1991 with a mission to promote racial justice and police accountability, NAN quickly attracted headlines. But over the years, it also attracted money, a lot of it. By the mid-2000s, NAN was receiving millions in donations from corporate giants, some of the same companies Sharpton had once rallied boycotts against. Names like Walmart, AT&T, Viacom, Comcast, and McDonald's began showing up in NAN. Annual financial disclosures. For civil rights groups, this level of corporate support is rare. For Sharpton, it was normal. And here's where it gets messy. Between 2014 and 2021, Sharpton reportedly received nearly $1 million in bonuses from NAN. This includes eye-catching payouts of $437,555 in 2016 and $278,503 in 2021. NAN claimed these were reimbursements for loans Sharpton had previously made to the organization and that the bonuses were approved by its board of directors. But critics weren't buying it. If NAN is a nonprofit meant to serve the public, how is its founder pulling hundreds of thousands in repayments while the organization reports deficits? In 2018, NAN brought in about $8.4 million in revenue, but spent more than $10 million. That's not growth, that's debt. Then came revelations about how those donations were used, not just to fund rallies or educational programs, but allegedly to cover travel, consulting fees to Sharpton allies, and family salaries. In total, more than $80,000 was reportedly paid to members of Sharpton's family from NAN funds. Some called it nepotism, others called it survival. But the optics were damning, especially when political donations started to intersect with Sharpton's role as a media figure. In 2024, just weeks before a high-profile MSNBC interview with Vice President Kamala Harris, it was revealed that her campaign had donated $500,000 to NAN. No disclosure was made on air. No mention of the donation. The interview was glowing. The optics, uncomfortable. Journalists at MSNBC were reportedly alarmed by the lack of transparency. Questions swirled internally. Was Sharpton using his platform to benefit political donors? Was NAN being treated like a political lobbying firm in disguise? Sharpton, of course, denied any impropriety. He insisted that the donation had nothing to do with the interview and was part of broader campaign outreach. But public trust had already taken a hit. For many, NAN had evolved into something more than an activist organization. It had become a brand, a powerful one. But like any brand, it needed funding. And sometimes that funding came with strings. The civil rights preacher was no longer just challenging the system. He was negotiating with it, sometimes partnering, sometimes profiting, always controlling the narrative. And that's when the real shift occurred. Because Al Sharpton wasn't just collecting checks, he was collecting leverage, political, cultural, and economic. Which brings us to the next level of this story. Kingmaker or puppet master? By 2019, it was official. If you were a Democratic candidate hoping to win black votes in America, you had to go through Al Sharpton. Not just symbolically, literally. Every spring, the National Action Network hosts its annual convention in New York. What was once a modest gathering had now become a political pilgrimage. That year, Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Beto O'Rourke, and nearly every other major Democratic name showed up, just to get a few minutes of Sharpton's time. Each one took the stage. Each one praised NAN. Each one posed for photos. The message was clear. Sharpton's endorsement matters. But what's the price of that influence? Sharpton's proximity to power was no accident. Over the years, he had transformed himself from a street preacher with a bullhorn into a gatekeeper of the black political agenda. He brokered meetings. He facilitated deals. He even shaped talking points for national candidates. Some saw him as a kingmaker, amplifying the voices of black America and holding political leaders accountable. But others whispered a darker title, puppet master. In private, Democratic insiders expressed unease. Was Sharpton truly representing the grassroots, or was he controlling the narrative to benefit himself? The $500,000 Kamala Harris donation, undisclosed on MSNBC, only deepened the suspicion. Was access to NAN for sale? Then there was New York City Mayor Eric Adams, another politician who leaned on Sharpton's platform. As Adams's approval ratings faltered in 2024 and challengers emerged, Sharpton didn't stay quiet. He published a full-throated op-ed defending the mayor, invoking the legacy of David Dinkins and warning against unseating one of our own. It wasn't just a political stance. It was a message. Backing from Sharpton meant survival. But here's the problem. When one man holds that much influence, dissent becomes dangerous. Sharpton's critics argue that he silences emerging black leaders who don't align with him, that his platform elevates his favorites while freezing out others, that he speaks for a community, but not always with it. And in the background, his MSNBC presence continued. Every weekend, millions watched Politics Nation. But what they didn't see? The silent transactions, the donations, the favors owed. In this political chessboard, Sharpton wasn't just a player. He was the dealer, the referee, and sometimes the house. So now that we've followed the money and mapped out the influence, let's rewind the clock. Because this transformation, from preacher to power broker, didn't happen overnight. To understand how Sharpton became untouchable, we need to go back to where it all began. Dinners with presidents. By the time Barack Obama entered the 2008 presidential race, Al Sharpton was no longer a street preacher with a megaphone. He was a political force, but it wasn't until the cameras caught them smiling together at a private NAN fundraiser that America realized something had changed. Sharpton wasn't at the table. He was setting it. In 2007, the National Action Network hosted its annual convention with an unexpected guest, then Senator Barack Obama. The crowd gave a standing ovation, but it was Obama's words that made history. He called Sharpton the voice of the voiceless and praised him as someone who never gives up the fight for those left behind. It was a full-circle moment for Sharpton, who had spent decades being branded a troublemaker, a hoaxer, and a radical. Now, the man who once protested outside the White House was being invited in, and it didn't stop there. During Obama's presidency, Sharpton's presence became a mainstay. He attended state dinners. He sat in closed-door policy briefings. He was consulted on matters of policing, racial justice, and voter suppression. His NAN conventions became political must-attends, not just for symbolic reasons, but because Sharpton was now viewed as a political strategist with cultural pull. It wasn't just about speeches and selfies. Behind the scenes, sources say Sharpton advised Obama's team on grassroots messaging, helping shape the language around racial equity and urban development. He had the ear of the president, and if Obama was the face of hope and change, Sharpton was its microphone in the trenches. By 2011, Sharpton's political clout was solidified when Obama gave the keynote speech at NAN's 20th anniversary. Again, in 2014, the president returned to deliver another headline-grabbing address, this time focusing on criminal justice reform. The message was clear. Al Sharpton had gone from agitator to advisor. But Sharpton wasn't content with one administration. When Joe Biden assumed office, it was reported that during a private White House meeting in 2022, Biden personally informed Sharpton of his plan to run for re-election in 2024 before announcing it to the public. Let that sink in. In an age where leaks and speculation run wild, the President of the United States allegedly confided in a civil rights activist before telling the nation. Why? Because Al Sharpton is more than a headline. He's a power node, quiet, strategic, and unshakably relevant. Through NAN, Sharpton crafted more than just a nonprofit. It became a crossroad of politics and protest, of influence and legacy. NAN conventions featured panels with Silicon Valley executives, federal lawmakers, faith leaders, and activists from Ferguson to Flint. These weren't rallies. They were strategy sessions for the future of Black America. And as the civil rights landscape evolved, from marching in the streets to negotiating policies behind the scenes, Sharpton adapted. Critics saw it as selling out. Supporters called it maturity. But no one could deny this. The boy preacher had become the one person every politician wanted in their corner, just in case the tide turned. And yet, amid the political deals and presidential dinners, many still asked, who is Al Sharpton really? A prophet? A strategist? A survivor? To find the truth, we need to go even further back. Before the jets, before the cameras, back to Brooklyn, back to the beginning. The hustler with a Bible. Long before the private jets and the tax scandals, before the interviews with Kamala Harris or the photo ops with Barack Obama, there was just Alfred Charles Sharpton Jr., a skinny kid with fire in his voice and chaos at home. Born in 1954 in Brooklyn, New York, Al Sharpton's life started in the shadow of the pulpit. By age 4, he was already mimicking preachers in front of a mirror. By 9, he was ordained as a Pentecostal minister. That's not exaggeration, that's documentation. He wasn't playing church, he was the church. His voice had conviction, his words, weight. People called him the boy preacher. But his home life was no sermon. At just 10 years old, Sharpton's father left the family. Not just walked out, but left them destitute, virtually overnight. His mother, once a homemaker, was thrust into the harsh reality of cleaning houses for rich families to survive. They went from relative comfort to food stamps. They moved to the projects, and Sharpton, barely a teenager, learned what survival looked like. The family's struggles didn't end there. In later years, it would be revealed, controversially, that Sharpton's father began a relationship with Sharpton's own 18-year-old half-sister. The two would go on to have a child. The betrayal cut deep. This wasn't just abandonment. It was violation on a personal level, both emotional and familial. and yet somehow the boy preacher stayed on fire. In 1973, fate handed him a mentor that would change everything. James Brown, the godfather of soul. They met through Brown's manager during a civil rights benefit. What started as a backstage introduction became a bond that felt like father and son. James Brown gave Sharpton more than confidence. He gave him a blueprint, the stage presence, the tailored suits, the larger-than-life persona. Brown taught Sharpton that optics are everything, and Sharpton paid attention. He styled his hair like Brown. He sharpened his tongue for TV interviews, and he began crafting the character that would one day become a national lightning rod. With Brown's backing, Sharpton launched the National Youth Movement, a group aimed at helping kids in inner cities escape drugs, gangs, and poverty. He wasn't just talking, he was building. But the true turning point came in 1987. That year, a 15-year-old black girl named Tawana Brawley was found in a garbage bag, smeared with racial slurs, and claiming she had been treated inhumanly by white men, some of whom, she said, were law enforcement officers. The nation gasped, but no one jumped in louder or faster than Al Sharpton. Flanked by attorneys Alton H. Maddox and C. Vernon Mason, Sharpton catapulted the case to the national spotlight. He held press conferences, he led protests, he took the case to Oprah, to Nightline, to the New York Times. He was everywhere, and then it unraveled. Investigations found inconsistencies. Witnesses contradicted. A grand jury ultimately concluded that Brawley's story was fabricated. The case was deemed a hoax, and Sharpton, he was sued for defamation. He lost. He was ordered to pay damages. That moment could have ended his career, but instead, it built his brand. Sharpton had discovered something dark but powerful. Controversy breeds coverage, and coverage equals control. In his own words, if I walked down the street and said hello, nobody cared. But if I yelled, fire, the cameras came running. So that's what he did. He yelled, fire, again and again, sometimes in protest, sometimes in principle, but always with strategy. This wasn't about fame, it was about leverage. Sharpton learned that if he could stay relevant, he could stay useful. And if he could stay useful, no amount of scandal, not even $4.5 million in tax debt, could stop him from sitting down with a president, cutting deals with corporations, or shaping policy from a TV studio. That's the duality, the paradox, the evolution. From the housing projects of Brooklyn to the oval carpets of the White House, from boy preacher to America's most media-savvy activist. But as Sharpton rose, so did the questions, because influence always has a cost, and fame, it's never free. So now let's zoom in on the world of media, where Sharpton turned visibility into value, controversy into currency, and a Sunday morning pulpit into a seven-figure platform. The fame game: cameras, controversy, and control. By 2011, Al Sharpton had taken his talents to a new arena: national television. MSNBC handed him his own show, Politics Nation. And just like that, the street preacher officially became a media personality. No more waiting for networks to invite him on. Now, he was the network. The move raised eyebrows. A civil rights activist with an open political agenda now had access to a primetime cable platform. Some called it evolution. Others called it propaganda, but no one could deny it worked. Sharpton's show was a magnet. Viewers tuned in to hear his bold takes on police brutality, economic injustice, and the failures of America's political elite. And while the production value wasn't flashy, the content hit hard. He spoke directly to Black America, and often for it. He challenged Republicans. He held Democrats accountable, at least the ones outside his inner circle. Beyond television, Sharpton's digital presence was also booming. With millions of followers across social media, he became a powerful voice in shaping real-time public discourse. When a shooting happened, when a verdict dropped, when a mayor spoke out of line, Sharpton's reaction went viral within hours. His tweets became headlines. His comments became rallying cries. But power always attracts scrutiny. As the lines between activist and media mogul blurred, critics accused him of playing both sides. On one hand, he called out injustice. On the other, He allegedly softened his tone when large donors or political allies were involved. Some insiders even called it pay to preach, an unspoken dynamic where corporations and candidates contributed to NAN in exchange for Sharpton's silence or support. And while this was never proven outright, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Companies like Walmart and Comcast, once targets of boycotts, were now key sponsors of NAN conventions. Democratic candidates received glowing coverage. Political missteps from Sharpton allies often went unmentioned. So was Sharpton a journalist, an activist, a lobbyist, a businessman? The truth was, all of the above. That's why his critics didn't stick and why his support never fully collapsed. Because Sharpton didn't just control the mic, he controlled the narrative. And when you control the narrative, you don't need approval, you just need reach. But there's one thing even media power can't bury: the physical trail of wealth. And while Sharpton's public image has been carefully managed, his real estate moves reveal another side of the story, a quieter, wealthier side. And that's where we're headed next. The real estate nobody talks about. Tucked away in Manhattan's Upper West Side is one of New York City's most elite neighborhoods, brownstones with doormen, quiet, tree-lined streets, units that sell for millions, and nestled among them, Reverend Al Sharpton's condo. Reports link Sharpton to this luxury residence, estimated to be worth well over 7 figures. While the exact ownership structure remains murky, whether under his name, a shell entity, or via NAN-related financing, the association raised serious questions, because for years, Sharpton had portrayed himself as the voice of the underdog, the man of the people. But few people from the projects he came from can afford a building with valet service and panoramic park views. This isn't just about where he lives, it's about how it's all funded. The scrutiny intensified in 2022 when NAN became embroiled in a rent dispute with its Harlem landlord. Court filings showed the organization owed tens of thousands in back rent for their Harlem headquarters. The landlord claimed lease violations and non-payment, while Sharpton's team fired back, blaming administrative errors and miscommunications. The lawsuit dragged on for months, with media outlets circling like vultures. For Sharpton, it wasn't just embarrassing, it was contradictory. How could the same man living in a luxury condo be running a non-profit that was allegedly struggling to pay its rent? Sharpton publicly defended himself. He maintained that personal finances were separate from NAN's operations, and that the real estate drama was being blown out of proportion. He claimed political opponents were using the situation to discredit his work. But again, the pattern was hard to ignore. NAN's public financial statements showed years of operating in deficit. Yet Sharpton himself continued to fly private, dress in custom suits, and appear on national TV as the polished face of modern activism. Somewhere between the ledgers and the limelight, a new question emerged. Was Al Sharpton still the activist he claimed to be? Or had he become the very symbol of elite access he once marched against? The real estate was just the latest thread, but when pulled, it unraveled deeper truths. Because wealth leaves fingerprints on tax records, on property deeds, on donor logs, and in Sharpton's case, those fingerprints paint a picture of a man who mastered the art of duality. On one side, he champions the poor. On the other, he negotiates with the powerful. He speaks of injustice, but sits courtside at NBA games. He talks about transparency, while nonprofits under his control face allegations of undisclosed payments and personal perks. He shouts Black Lives Matter, but has dinner with billionaires whose companies fuel the very inequalities he condemns. Is that betrayal? Or is that the cost of having a seat at the table? And maybe that's the genius of Al Sharpton, because while others were playing checkers, he was playing chess, moving through the systems he once opposed, adapting, adjusting, and ultimately mastering them. So here we are, at the crossroads between legacy and controversy. One man, two narratives. He's been praised as the conscience of Black America and criticized as its most polished opportunist. He built a national movement, but he also built a media empire. He fought for justice, but he also fought to protect his brand. From Harlem to Hollywood, from the hood to the hill, Sharpton has become a master of navigating both power and protest, sometimes at the same time. So the real question is, was Al Sharpton always playing the system, or did he become the system? You decide, is he a hero, a hustler, or both? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk. And if this story blew your mind, Hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started. We've got more stories they never wanted you to hear. Check out what's next, displaying on the screen.